Welcome to another edition of the All Angels podcast. And we continue our Angels preview week with two beat writers. Rhett Bollinger returning from MLB.com. He's been on the podcast a handful of times, so I'm sure you guys are all familiar with him. But new to the podcast, Fabian Ardaya of The Athletic, also covering the Angels. How are you doing, both of you guys?
Doing great, yeah.
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
So we're here. Obviously, spring training is, we're recording this on a Wednesday, so tomorrow will be a week exactly to the start of the 2021 season. So, Fabian, I'm going to ask you first because this is the first time I've had you on. 2020 obviously didn't start the way a lot of the Angel fans wanted, but it ended really strong. What kind of things do you think can translate from that 2020 season over to this season?
I think something that I think was a common thread, especially in the first half of last year, was like doing the little things well. I mean, the Angels really didn't do those little things well in that first month of 2020. I mean, they got off to a really slow start in a lot of really frustrating ways, whether it be, I think they led the league in blown saves last year. That's obviously something that's really frustrating, can make a big impact on the season. Just a little sequencing stuff. I know former GM Billy Epler, that's something he touched upon a lot. It's just a lot of different things in sequencing that didn't go right for the Angels. And I know Joe Maddon's touched upon it this spring is how much of a focus they've had on trying to correct those issues. And part of it's how they sort of want to translate that information down from the new front office, Perry Manassian, down to the clubhouse. And part of it's also just finding different people who can execute a little bit better, because like there were moments in the second half of last year where it really looked like this was the team that they expected to see over the course of the season. And maybe if they play a whole full 162, things will look a little bit different. But obviously the flaws of the Angels sort of showed themselves over the course of an abbreviated season more than usual, and that's sort of why things ended the way they did.
So, Rhett, coming out of 2020, the offseason, a couple big names that were out there, whether it be obviously Trevor Bauer being the main guy pitching wise. They end up getting additions in the pitching with Alex Cobb and Quintana as starters. What did you think of those moves, bringing those guys in for the rotation?
Yeah, I know a lot of fans are disappointed not getting a guy like Bauer. It was never that realistic with the kind of money he wanted, with this team being close, to the luxury tax and all that. It just wasn't going to happen, especially because his team had a lot of needs. They're two guys that are familiar with Joe Maddon, and truthfully, both had, you never know it's going to translate, but they both had great springs. I mean, Alex Cobb is more tangible because with the drive line, kind of fixes mechanics. He's got the lower half a little bit better in sync. He's throwing harder. He's had a track record of success, in the past, so it's something he can probably come back from. And then Quintana's coming off a kind of a crazy year where he cut his hand doing dishes and missed most of the season. And, so he's had a great spring too. I think he's given up one earned run all spring. That was today on a home run to Hunter Dozier. So you never really know how it's going to translate, but you still want to see those kind of guys do well because you never really know what you're expect. And so far, so good. So we'll see, but definitely a good sign from both guys this spring.
So, Fabian, obviously pitching has always been an issue, and you kind of mentioned it in your first answer with the blown saves. Bringing in Riel Iglesias, another new name for the Angels. How's he done this spring, and how's he going to fit in with this team?
I think especially with spring training, I think the results are the results, but at the end of the day, you want to see like how the stuff looks, how the stuff plays. And I mean, the stuff's there for Riel Iglesias, it appears, this spring. And he's been as consistent of a reliever as you've probably seen in the game the last decade or so, or last half decade. I mean, ever since he converted from the rotations to the bullpen. And he's someone who you would expect to sort of lock it down. Like, this is the first time the Angels really had like a traditional closer type since Houston Street, and that's been a while since Houston Street was pretty healthy. So I mean, that's probably part of why they brought him in. There's an opportunity to add that isn't always out there. I know the Reds were really trying to shed payroll with that trade, and that's sort of how he became available, because those types of guys aren't typically available on the open market that easily, especially not during the offseason, maybe closer to the deadline if a team is out of it. But yeah, that's why the Angels brought him in. It's just a matter of if the rest of the pieces are going to be good enough. It's if Mike Myers can be what he was last year. It's if Felix Pena can be what he was last year when he gets healthy again now. If Ty Butcher can be closer to what he was in 2018, the beginning of 2019. These are a lot of question marks about this bullpen, and it's going to be made a lot easier on them if the rotation can be closer to what the projections are than in recent years.
You mentioned Felix Pena, obviously a guy that a lot of people expected to be in the bullpen this season. Got injured during spring training. Do you have any, or have you heard anything from whether it be Perry or Joe about where he's at and his expectation for making the opening day roster?
It doesn't sound like he's going to be on the opening day roster. I know he's like, his timeline is sort of hitting right against, even if he hits like the aggressive side of that timeline, it'd be right around spring training ending. And even then, like, you probably, with a guy like that coming off a couple weeks without throwing, you probably would want to get him in some game action before you throw him back out there. So I wouldn't be surprised at all. He probably will start the season on the injured list, but it probably might be a first week or first couple weeks or so before we see him. And even then, it might take a little bit longer if they want to see him maybe in a game down at the alt site or something like that, sort of like a rehab assignment.
Rhett, last season, the pitching, blown saves, starters not really seem to be going deep. With the additions they made this year, both in the bullpen and in the rotation, do you feel that this 2021 pitching staff as a whole is better than last year's?
I do think so, yeah. And I think a lot of it's going to come down to healthy Shohei Otani too, right? I mean, he's been pretty incredible this spring. And if he's, a member of that 6-man rotation and can stay in that rotation and be healthy, he definitely pitches like an ace, and Dylan Bundy has shown, no signs of slowing down from last year either. Like I said, spring training numbers are what they are, but they've been great. And his stuff, like obviously the stuff matters, and that's looked great. Same thing as with Quintana and Cobb. So yeah, I think it's a little deeper. I think it's nice to see guys like, Reed Detmer's a little closer to the majors. We could possibly see Jaime Barria in there a little bit later if they need more depth. We'll see about, maybe Chris Rodriguez, but Chris Rodriguez might also be a reliever now. So, but a little bit more rotation depth, I think, in the past. It's going to be really important because, as everyone's talking about, it's a big jump in innings for everybody, right? I mean, the entire league has to deal with all these guys jumping from such a short season to a full, 162. So they got to find innings. I think the team has, some veterans that have been able to do that in the past, but it's going to be on a lot of guys healthy and potentially get some contributions from some other guys later in the season.
And you mentioned Shohei Otani, and that's actually my next point, was that his spring offensively and offensively and pitching have been really, really good and got a lot of Angel fans excited. Fabian, what have you seen the biggest difference between Otani? I can't really say at this point last year, because this point last year everyone was shut down, but the beginning of spring training last year to the beginning of spring training this year.
I think he just looks healthier. I think that's the thing. Like, I know says he was healthy last year coming into summer camp, said that he wasn't really inhibited by anything, but obviously, that wasn't really the case. I think you saw after he went down and he got shut down for pitching, he said like the forearm had been something that had been bothering a little bit as he was ramping up. And everything leading up to that was like so disjointed with his rehab after Tommy John surgery. I mean, the fact that he needed knee surgery that interrupted his throwing program, the fact that the world shut down when he was supposed to be ramping up to throw, it just never really lined up really well for him. And now he had like a whole winter. He revamped his body. He sort of felt physically like himself and was able to take advantage of that and take steps forward. And probably there might be different ways where he maybe feels better or feels different than he did coming into his first spring training with the Angels in 2018, because even then he came in with a grade 1 UCL. So he might be even in a better spot because he's maybe built up his lower half a little bit better. He's more acquainted with the league. And I think that's why you're seeing, like, he hasn't really ever had like a good offensive spring training before. And he's had a really good one now. And obviously he wasn't great pitching-wise in his first spring training. And now he looks a little bit more comfortable. Like, he just looks comfortable and he looks healthy and he looks confident. And part of that you can attribute to his off-season workouts. Part of it you can probably attribute to him just feeling healthy. Part of it you can probably attribute to the Angels sort of not having any limitations on him. But I think a combination of all those things, he just feels like he's in a better place now than he's been in a couple of years.
Rhett, obviously with Dylan Bundy getting the opening day start, you can pretty much pencil in Otani DHing somewhere in that lineup. Has there been any talk about when Otani is going to make his first start on the mound?
Not yet. They're still trying to figure that out. They probably know. They haven't told us yet. It's more probably the right response, but we'll find out soon. You can kind of plot it out based on when he's going to be in the order, because same thing, maybe by tomorrow on Thursday, we might find out more about how it's going to go at Dodger Stadium too, in terms of the freeway series and kind of figure out goes in order from there. We'll know because tomorrow's Bundy, and then whoever goes after Bundy, you can kind of know who the rest of the rotation is. But as of now, Madden hasn't told us anybody beyond Bundy. But yeah, you're right. It'll be interesting to see when Otani's in there and how they're going to utilize him at DH leading up to that start, and whether or not right away if he's going to be hitting, in that start too, or if they're going to wait until later in the season, or what they're going to do with, because it's pretty fun to see that, in San Diego last week with him, pitching against those guys, a great lineup, and also getting the hits off of, former Cy Young Award winner and Blake Snell. So if he stays healthy, like I said, it's going to be a fun year to watch him play.
And kind of piggybacking off of that, and that made me think of something. Has Joe Madden said or hinted one way or the other where that's a possibility during the season, or was this just a one-off, kind of just for fun to see Otani pitch and hit in the same game, Rhett?
Yeah, it's supposed to happen during the season too. So Joe said it'll happen. He said probably more likely maybe early while he's still fresh. We'll kind of see as it goes, later into the season and where he's at pitching wise. And too, I guess, they've been saying no restrictions, so he could maybe stay in that rotation the whole year, which would be great. But we'll see. It's a big jump in innings. He hasn't really thrown that many over the last 2 years. He's thrown only 2 innings or so in terms of actual professional innings. So it's going to be a big jump. So we'll see how long he can kind of go and how deep he can go into that season as a starter. But obviously they want him in the playoffs too if they can get there as a rotation member. So it'll be definitely interesting to watch. But I think we'll see him in there in the lineup occasionally, at least when he's on the mound.
So that's kind of the pitching aspect, and Otani, I guess, is a nice little segue because he does both. We can kind of start talking about the lineup. Joe Madden came out today. I believe you guys both tweeted out that he is thinking about putting Trout into the third spot in the lineup, where for the last couple of years that I can remember, he's been pretty solid in that number 2 spot. So, Fabian, what do you feel? How do you feel about Trout in the third, or do you think it's better to have him in that second spot?
I'm typically of the camp that lineup order and stuff like that is ultimately not doesn't matter that much over the course of the season. But I know obviously the data's there that you typically want your best hitter hitting second, and obviously there's good data behind that suggesting sort of opportunities. You're getting more plate appearances by hitting early in the lineup. There's more opportunities to have runners on base or runners on base with less than 2 outs if you're having him bat second. The way Joe Madden sort of explained is he's not worried about the amount of plate appearances Mike Trout has with no one on 2 outs because he feels that might be skewed by the first inning a little bit. Although first inning it's probably one of his 4 plate appearances per game. And he also pretty much said he believes in that David Fletcher and probably whoever hits second, whether it's Shohei Otani or Jared Walsh, he believes one of those 2 guys is going to get on base. That's going to set things up and really set things up for Mike Trout to be a run producer, then have Anthony Rendon obviously behind him, and having that left-handed hitter probably in that second spot, maybe especially with the 3 batter minimum, is going to make it a little bit difficult for opposing managers to try to use any specialty relievers against that part of the lineup.
And same question to you, Rhett. How do you feel? Where do you think it's best to put Trout in this lineup coming up in the 21 season?
Yeah, I'm with Bob, and I think that it always made sense to kind of hit him second because the numbers always say get more at bats that way and all that. But with this lineup, if Walsh, it's going to be a key to see if Walsh can keep it up from last year and see too. And if he doesn't, maybe like I said, it could be Shohei hitting second. That'd be pretty fun to see. I'd definitely be in favor of that when he's in the lineup. And we'll see too. Against lefties, if they decide to still hit Walsh or Otani there, they decide to maybe move Trout up a little bit. But the big thing, like Fabian said, is that 3 batter minimum too. If you have Walsh or Otani in there, there's no way they're going to bring in, especially a lefty. Even with 2 outs, it'd be a risk. You could, but then you'd have to run that risk that now you got Trout and Rendon coming up right after it. So and even the top, the bottom of the lineup, I think Fowler's going to hit 9th, and he's a lefty, so they're going to break up the lineup a little bit and make sure they have the righty lefty combos so that teams can't use those specialty relievers to come in, and even the guys that are great right-handed relievers that come in for try to face Trout or Rendon right after that, they'd have to face potentially Otani or Walsh if he's playing there too. So to me, if I'm saying, it doesn't probably really matter too much in the long run. There will be days I'm sure we'll try it second, but it makes some sense with this team. And so the risk is always the first inning, both guys get out and Trout's up with 2 outs and nobody on. But at the same time, that doesn't happen. It'll happen, but it won't happen hopefully too often with 2 guys who can get on base.
Another guy that's going to be in this lineup, I think personally is going to be a big key and a factor in how well this lineup produces is Justin Upton. Him having a great spring, granted, like you mentioned earlier, spring is spring, but in his recent past, he hasn't even had a healthy spring to really judge it off of, it seems like. But so, Rhett, what's a realistic expectation you think of a guy like Justin Upton coming into the season?
It's a good question. It's hard to really know exactly what to expect, but the good news is that we saw him kind of have that resurgence last year, second half of the season, or really that last month. It's a great last month, which is a good sign from him. As we know, he's dealt with a lot of injuries over the last few years, the turf toe and the knee injuries and all that. And so finally now he had a full regular off season. He's been, outside of, Shohei, he's probably been their second best hitter in camp, tied for the team lead, 4 homers, another one day that was, absolutely crushed, over the berm in left field. So he looks like his timing's on. I think all fans know that he's a streaky hitter, but at the same time, it's good to see him all these good streaks now and show that he's still capable of these, because honestly, 2 years ago and even the beginning of last year, you kind of wondered, can he even get a hot streak anymore? And sure enough, he got in a great one to end the season, and then one since. So another good sign, and we'll kind of see if that can roll into the season.
Another guy in the outfield, I guess, kind of competing for that fourth outfield spot, Taylor Ward. Fabian, what do you hear? What do you think is going to come down for that fourth outfield spot? It seems like there's a lot of names to this point, and it's really close to the season. Who do you think has is out in front of everybody else?
Yeah, it's really interesting because it seems like a lot of them have had really good springs too, right. Which is that's one of the few times where spring training stats really matters, because that's your only sample sometimes with some of these guys to sort of see how they look. But even a guy like Scott Schebler, who I think coming into the spring was sort of on the peripheral, he's looked really good, and they've tried him in center, they've tried different stuff just to see how he looks out there. He's had a good spring. I know Juan Lagares has looked amazing this spring, and he's probably the front runner to make the roster at this point, even though he's a non-roster invitee, because he's looked really good offensively, and defensively he's really good at all 3 spots. Taylor Ward has looked good this spring. He's made an impression, and he's someone who Joe Madden really likes. His swing looks really, really good. And the fact that he's versatile is going to help him a lot. He can play all 3 outfield spots. He can play first base. He can catch. And I know it's been a while since he's played third base, but I'm sure if there's a long-term injury there, they can probably throw him at least some reps there. So that versatility is going to help him in terms of staying around. But I think in terms of making the opening day roster, it might hurt him a little bit. Just the fact that he does have options remaining, that makes it easier for them to sort of keep him in the organization without necessarily having him start the season with the big club, and that'll help a guy like Juan Lagares. And I know John Jay has sort of had an up and down spring so far, but he's someone who is another non-roster invitee, someone who Joe Madden's familiar with, and someone he really likes. And he's someone that I know different younger guys in that outfield mix have really taken to in the clubhouse, whether it be a Joe Waddell or someone like that. They really look up to him. So if they can keep him in the organization, whether it be in the alternate site to start the season or if he makes the opening day roster, that's someone that I know Joe Madden really is a fan of.
So, Rhett, I guess the infield version of that is the utility infield. That seems like a competition that has been kind of heating up with Rojas putting on a really good hitting display this spring, and then obviously with Rengifo there from last year. Same question, but for that position, who do you think is ahead of the group and makes that opening day roster?
That one's really tough. I kind of assumed that when Barreto went down, it would be Rengifo being on the 40-man roster and also having a great spring. He's debuted kind of a new stance and in the batter's box, and so far the results. But the way that Joe kind of gushes about Rojas, it makes you think, especially because he's saying that, as much as Rojas isn't a true utility guy because he can't really play short, you have David Fletcher on the roster. He could move over there at short when Iglesias isn't in the lineup. So it's an awesome story, but it also keeps something. Maybe they just go with Rengifo now and then maybe add, Rojas to the roster later because they might not have enough spots. But the other thing is maybe they decide to kind of pull a switcheroo and they put Taylor Ward in the outfield because he's on the 40-man already, and they decide to, instead of giving that 40-man spot to Lagares, they give it to Rojas. Would that surprise me? Yeah, I think so, but it's still in the realm of possibility, I think. But I do think Lagares, like Fabian said, is a favorite in the outfield, and I'd still probably put Rengifo slightly ahead of Rojas just because of the roster situation and stuff. But it'll be fun to see, and I do think that at some point we're going to see Rojas. He's hit so well at every level and every spring training we've pretty much ever seen him. So I know the fans love him, so they're clamoring for him. He's the next David Fletcher out there. So I'm hoping to see it. It'll be cool. Anaheim high school kid up in the majors with the Angels.
Definitely local. So, and then, kind of now going into the guys that we already know aren't going to make the opening day roster, and one in particular, Joe Adell. So, Fabian, he got brought up last year. A lot of people, myself included, felt it was kind of rushed because of the injuries and stuff like that. How did you feel about his 2020 season, and how do you think he fits with the 2021 season? Do we see him at all? Do we not see him until late, or he comes up fairly early?
I think the Angels will say he was rushed up to the big leagues last year too. I think so many different circumstances of last year sort of led to that happening. I mean, the fact that there weren't any minor league games for him to get any reps at, or it's hard to really get development at the alternate site. I think it sort of is different for different guys, that like what they were able to take from that last year. I think maybe it's just part of it's also just like what guys had to work on. I think what Joe Adell could really use, I think Joe Madden said it a lot of times, is just a lot of reps, a lot of game reps, which are really hard to replicate out in the alternate site. I think he came up way too early, and I think it was partially just because he had like a half of a 2019 season too, just because of the injuries he had going into that year. He hasn't really had a full season of baseball in 3 years, and that's really difficult. I think you've sort of seen that take a toll on his defense. Also, the fact that he's moved to a corner that he's never really played before, that's something you've seen, that learning curve there. Like it's growing pains for sure. He looks a little bit better in the box this year. He shortened some things up with his swing and his stance, and his approach is a lot closer to where it typically has been when he's hit pretty well. So I think there's been definitely some signs of improvement for him, but I think last year was really tough for him. It was really tough mentally for a lot of these guys in the minors, just sort of dealing with that season being taken away from them, and then having to learn how to develop on the alternate site, and then some guys sort of coming up and seeing live pitching that they hadn't seen him really, like real live pitching against other opponents in months. So it was difficult for him. I think this spring, this year, if he gets a chance, I know the Angels' alternate site's going to be in Tempe, so they'll probably get a chance to actually get to see some live pitching even while down the alternate site. That's going to help. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year he's the everyday right fielder, but it's going to take some time. I wouldn't be expecting him to come up as soon as like the minor league season starts May 1st or anything like that. I think they're going to bring him up when it's time, like when they feel like he's ready to be their everyday right fielder. They're going to be a little more hesitant, I think, to call him up earlier than they think he's ready.
Rhett, the MLB.com came out with their farm system rankings, and the Angels were, if I remember correctly, in the late 20s, like 26, I believe, or 27. But obviously, Joe is not in that prospect because of his time last year up in the big leagues. But you have guys like Brandon Marsh and guys that you mentioned already, like Reed Detmers, Chris Rodriguez. But how do you feel about this farm system as a whole and where it's at right now compared to, even 3 years ago?
Yeah, it's tough to say. I mean, it's not the best, but they do have some intriguing guys. A lot of it, though, a lot of outfielders, and obviously an infielder they like a lot in Jeremiah Jackson. They hope can stay on the dirt. But Jordan Adams and a lot of outfielders out there, guys they drafted last year too. David Calabrese. I mean, some of these guys that Trent Devo. Some of these guys that are younger. Some of the guys they got from the Bahamas even. So they've got a lot of outfielders in their system. Middle guys. Kyron Parrish is a guy they really like a lot at shortstop. Pitching wise, they've got some intriguing arms, but just not the organizational depth you'd hope for. From a team like that, especially a team that's been desperate for pitching. So yeah, it's probably right. It's not as good as it was in a sense because Adell was, at one point I think he was a number 4, number 5 overall prospect. Of course, that's going to move you up the system and up ranking. And Marsh is a top 100 guy, but he's really the only top 100 guy right now I think listed on MLB.com. So they got to continue to build that. That's going to be a big thing under Perry now. I know Billy did his best to try to stock that farm system up because when he got it, it was really Luis Rengifo was options. So that opened some things up potentially for
just got that too.
So that'll be interesting for Jose Rojas. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it'll be interesting. So yeah.
Wow, I should have had like a breaking news sounder just in case something like that
right.
happened. But now I can plan for a future podcast. But yeah, like you mentioned, Rengifo optioned by the Angels today. So do you think then that opens the door for Jose Rojas to be that utility guy come opening day, Fabian?
Oh, it definitely does. I think it really does because he was the main competition for that. Jack Mayfield was another person who was in that mix. He was also optioned just now. So, I mean, yeah, that's a big sign for him. They're going to have to obviously clear up a 40-man spot for him, but like that's huge news. I think Joe Madden was sort of hinting at that a little bit earlier today when he was talking about how viable Rojas really was for the big league roster to start the season.
Yeah, that's awesome that he's gonna like Rhett said, a local Anaheim kid possibly playing in Anaheim on opening day, or at least suiting up on the first. So obviously we talked a little bit about the Angels and how they're could be better this year than they were last year. If everything goes right, and obviously injuries can be a big part of this, but I'll go to you first, Rhett. The ceiling on this team, where do you think the ceiling is as far as like a win total? Are they mid 90s, low 90s if everything kind of goes realistically right?
I think ceiling's probably somewhere in the 90s. Yeah, I think more realistic is maybe like high 80s. I think they'll be in the mix. It's going to be interesting division. The Astros lost a lot of guys, and so did the A's. So yeah, it'll be definitely a battle, and I think they've got the offense to compete. And the key is going to, like I said earlier, it's going to be if Cobb and Quintana, new additions, really can kind of step it up, and Bundy can repeat it, and Heaney can get a little bit more consistent, and for Otani to do his thing. So, yeah, I think there's definitely pieces, a lot more optimism. And I think a lot of that optimism, though, is definitely buoyed by Otani. I mean, Otani really was the talk of the spring, maybe even just in baseball, just to see, nobody else like him who can do that. Nobody else throwing 102 miles per hour and hitting home runs 468 feet. So yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where the stuff he can do, nobody else can. And to finally see it again, like I said earlier, he's, went through all these injuries. And so for him to finally, be back to his old self and really even healthier than he was the first time he was here because he had a torn UCL. So that's the big key, I think, for them in terms of win totals is if they get healthy with Tony all year, I think he could be a guy that really makes a difference and leads them to postseason contention.
And same question to you, Fabian. Where do you see the ceiling for this team if everything goes, relatively right?
I mean, the big thing I think we touched upon before is Shohei Otani. Mike Trout obviously is the most important player to the Angels, but the most important player who can swing things for the Angels is going to be Shohei Otani. Like if he can be this version of himself over the course of a full season as both a hitter and a pitcher, like that instantly raises the ceiling of what they can do. I think if Shohei is this over the course of a full season, I think they can be in the mix for the AL West just because Houston took a step back, Oakland took a step back. I think Seattle's still a year away, and then the Rangers are probably at the bottom of that division right now. But I sort of have them pegged to like 83, 84 wins right now, and that's sort of like just trying to be in the middle of like where they could potentially be. I think their floor is higher this year than it has been in recent years just because of some of the depth pieces they've added. But yeah, it's going to be somewhere in that maybe 76 to 90 win range. Anywhere in there would make sense for me.
So let me ask you this. The other beat writers I've had on to preview the other teams in the division, I asked them all the same question. It's hard to predict what your individual team is going to do because of injury and just circumstances that there's no way to predict. But I'm interested to see your guys' opinions on whoever does win the AL West. What is the win total of that team? And I'll ask Rhett first.
I think probably somewhere in the low 90s. The Astros don't really have the pitching depth, especially with Valdez getting hurt the way that he did, and Verlander out, and losing Springer on the offensive side, and so earlier like the A's, losing Hendricks and Simeon and all those guys. So I don't think they have a real elite team, and maybe the Astros with their offense with Alvarez and all those guys getting back, maybe they do still have enough to be, one of the elite teams. But to me, I don't really see it to that extent. So I think it's more like if you can get into the low 90s, you have a chance to win the division.
What about you, Fabian? Where do you think the division winner win total will be this year?
Yeah, I think somewhere around 92, 93 wins makes a lot of sense. Just because there's a lot of parity in this division. It seems like these teams, whatever one team has, the other one has something to counter it in a sense. Where it seems like there'll be a lot of close division battles. And I mean they're all playing against the NL West this year, which is certainly going to hurt in some cases because you're going to have to play the Dodgers and the Padres. That's going to help in some cases because you can beat up on the Rockies.
Yeah, definitely. And it's going to be cool, too, to them to get out of the West and play some other teams. unlike last year where obviously everything was regionalized and they kind of just stayed within that little bubble. So a couple under overs I want to kind of get you guys' opinion, and we talked about him a lot, Shohei Otani. So I'll go with Fabian first. Shohei Otani, does he get over or under 11.5 starts this year?
Ooh, that's tough. I'm just betting on the side of health, which typically isn't smart and typically hasn't, like, the track record hasn't fit, but I'll go with the over there. I think if he can get anywhere around like 120 innings, that's a massive game changer for this Angels rotation.
And same question to you, Rhett. Do you agree he goes over, or do you think under 11.5?
I think over. I think he'll stay in the rotation for quite a bit and be healthy and potentially make, he said he wants to make 30 starts. So I don't know if he's going to do that with the way the 6-man rotation works, and he'll probably get some breaks, but I mean, I could see him making a decent amount.
So now let's switch to his offensive side. Under over 24.5 home runs for Otani this year. I'll go Rhett first.
Ooh, that's a tough one. That's a really good number right there. Oh man, that's a lot. Shoot, same thing. I just like Shohei. I think he's pretty amazing. So I'll go with the over on that, and maybe he goes right at 25, 26. I don't know if he gets much more than that because he's not going to get as many at bats. He'll probably get same thing in the past when he's been healthy. He's like 100, 110 games maybe at DH. So it'd be hard to get too many more home runs than that. But I think his career is 22 or something. So we'll see.
And what about you, Fabian? Under or over that 24.5 number?
I'll go a slight under just because I have, like, if he's like at about 400 plate appearances, which is pretty much what he was in 2018. I think he hit like the 23 home run mark that year. I think that's about the pace that I expect for him for his power production in a good year. So I would say it's just barely under.
Okay, I'm gonna start saving these, and then when the season's over, we'll delete the wrong ones, and I'll just post up all the right ones on Twitter and stuff like that. And so make you guys look like geniuses. The next one, Dylan Bundy, again, the opening day starter, under over 16.5 wins this year. Fabian, I'll ask you first.
He's the type of starter, like, normally I wouldn't worry about like win totals that much for starting pitchers, but like he's the type of starter that goes deep enough now to still sort of get those type of decisions. I'll go under. I think like 15 wins would be a really good year for him. So I'll go slightly under.
And what about you, Rhett?
Yeah, I'll go slightly under too, just because he was in a 5-man rotation and had a chance to make 33, 34 starts. Maybe I'd say, hey, he's got a shot because of what he did last year. But with not as many opportunities, I'd say same thing. I'd say maybe 15 wins would be a nice mark for him.
And then moving on, obviously we've gone this whole podcast. We're about 30 minutes in without even really talking about Mike Trout. His home run total this year, under over, I'll go 42.5. Rhett.
Well, the new ball, it's going to be the beginning, right? We don't know if the ball is going to be suppressed or not. So I guess I'll go under. Say he's right around 40 home runs. I know we obviously did a lot more than that a couple of years ago, and the balls were extra juicy. So yeah, I think that he'll be right around 40 though. So I'll say slightly under.
And what about you, Fabian?
I'll go over. I know, like, one of the things I think we've noticed about Mike Trout the last couple of years is he's gotten more efficient in terms of like when he does get his bat on the ball, it's going to be crushed more often than not. And I think that's like, and he hits the types of home runs that aren't going to be influenced by the ball as much.
That's true. That's true.
I think he would have gotten to 50 home runs in that 2019 season if he hadn't gotten hurt. And I think he has a 50 home run season in him. So I think this is the year.
Nice. 50 home runs for Trout would be awesome to see. Another guy that this could very easily be his last year, not only with the Angels, but in baseball altogether, Albert Pujols. Splitting time with what is going to, assuming it's going to be Jared Walsh. So his at-bats probably aren't going to be that high. His home run total, do you think it's going to be, and I'll ask Fabian first, 23.5?
I'm going to go under. I just don't think he gets enough plate appearances. I think he'll find a way maybe into more plate appearances than we're thinking now, just because injuries, stuff happens, guys don't perform, and you want to keep guys fresh, so they'll throw them in there maybe a little bit more than we were expecting. But I don't see him producing consistently enough to get that sort of total in a limited number of at-bats.
And same question to you, Rhett. Where do you see Albert?
I tend to agree with Bobby in there. Probably the slightly under, just because I don't see him getting enough playing time, unless Walsh really doesn't kind of returns to earth after his breakout year last year. Because if not, I don't really see too many spots for Albert. I mean, especially with Shohei DHing a lot and being aggressive this year. I still think he has obviously the power. We've seen it in the spring. He's had a great spring. I just don't think he's going to give enough opportunity to really add too much. So even last year under Joe, he didn't really. At the end of the year, he really wasn't playing very much. So we'll kind of see what goes over the course of 162, but I say slightly under that total.
And then now for our fan favorite, David Fletcher, Rhett, is he under over 300 this year?
He's over. Yeah, I think so. I'm pretty confident he'll be over. With his bat to ball skills and his contact ability, he's only getting better, and he's the best in the game, really. I think in terms of contact and all that stuff, in terms of the rates and everything else, and swinging strikes and all that stuff. So no, he's got the profile to hit 300. Absolutely.
And then Fabian, 300 under over.
I think I'm going to go barely over. I think it's tough to predict anyone hitting over 300 at this point, and especially because a lot of it is relying on batted ball luck type of stuff. And it's sort of the question with him is all right, these sort of balls he keeps dunking in the right field. Is this a skill? Is this bad ball luck? What is it? And I'll believe it's a skill until I'm shown, until I'm proven otherwise. He's done this for parts of 3 seasons already, so I'll go with over.
And last under over, and we mentioned the blown saves issue last year and bringing in Rosel Iglesias, 32.5 saves for him. Well, I'll go Fabian first.
I'll say over. I'll say over on that, just because I think this is going to be a good enough team. I think Iglesias has been pretty healthy throughout his career, and it seems like Joe Maddon's going to be pretty consistent with how he plans on using him. So I think 32 and a half is good total to hit over on that.
And what about you, Rhett?
Yeah, I tend to agree with the over. Like Bob said earlier, he really is one of the more underrated closers over the last 5 years or so. I don't, Angels fans probably don't know too much about him because he was in the NL Central with the Reds. But the numbers are legit, and I think so far we've seen good stuff this spring. And like Fabian said, we'll see him in all those, ninth inning roles under Madden. So as long as his team is competing, he's going to be in there, and I think there's enough in there for more saves than that for sure.
So one question we got from our online is, what is the best part of being a beat writer? And we'll ask you first, Rhett.
Going on podcasts like this with you, man, of course.
All right, you don't have to kiss my ass, but hey, thank you. I'll take it though.
Just the fact that we're paid to, not the only thing we do, but to be around baseball, right? And I think that pretty much all beat writers love the game. Grew up loving it, and so it's fun to be a part of it and to document it. And one of the fun things, obviously, is being in the clubhouse and cultivating access in there and getting to know people even in the front office in person. But COVID's changed some of that. But yeah. I'm thinking that later in this year, I think hopefully things will be a little bit better, and we'll see. But yeah, I think in the travel is obviously a big perk, and it's cool to go to different ballparks and see different places and meet all the people. Truthfully, you get to meet so many amazing people in baseball around the game, and I think that's my favorite part, just the people you get to meet and interact with, over the years for sure.
And what about you, Fabian?
Yeah, I know we all gripe and complain about the length of games or going to games and all that. But it's baseball. You're gonna watch baseball, and you still love the game. I think I still really enjoy watching baseball, although I don't watch maybe as much of other teams as I used to, just because I would just always have a game on in college and stuff like that. But now obviously don't really do that as much anymore. But I like telling stories. I like people interest me. I'm curious about people, and I think there are a lot of really distinct personalities, different types of people who play baseball, and it sort of gives me a window to sort of talk to people and get to know people.
Yeah, it's really cool to meet. I've met I've become friends with Rhett through this whole process, and Fabian, I've actually met you once at a JC rehab start out in Rancho one night a couple of years ago. So it's really cool to see the process and all that stuff. So I wasn't planning on asking this question today, but then I saw the Angels came out today with the walk-up songs for all the players, or not all the players, but I think the majority of the players coming into the season. So I'll ask Fabian first. If you had walk-up music, what would it be?
I'm gonna sort of subject myself to Jeff Fletcher jokes as it is. So probably, I think 25-8 by Bad Bunny. It's a good song. And I think I know Carlos Correa used it last year during the postseason. I thought it hits pretty well. So I will go with that one, or Yo Le Diego.
All right. I knew the Bad Bunny one. I definitely knew that one. The first one. Rhett, what about you? What walk-up song would you have?
Well, I knew that Fabian was going to pick, Bad Bunny, his favorite. So I knew that one. I'm not quite hip enough. I like Bad Bunny, and I've seen him do some of the stuff now, the WWE champion or whatever it was. Either way, so my answer would be I always like Mark Morrison Return of the Mac. It's always a cool way to kind of come into the game, and it's just I don't know. I always like this song, and just kind of has that cool like intro to it, and you kind of come to the plate feeling good and get some far home runs. So yeah.
Awesome, guys. I really appreciate it. Fabian, obviously you're with The Athletic. Tell people where they can get you on Twitter and how they subscribe to The Athletic.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Fabian Ardaya, and then we have subscribe to The Athletic. I think we have a deal right now. It's like $1 per month for the first 6 months right now. So yeah, be interested to subscribe.
And then Rhett, if they haven't followed you already, where can they follow you and get your work at?
Yeah, at Rhett Bollinger on Twitter, and then same thing, MLB.com, and then obviously Angels baseball.com or Angels.com, all on the Angels website. You see all my stuff, and MLB.com will have a lot of stuff on there too, just on the homepage. And I think we're starting to work now on personalization and stuff too with some of the people. If you log in and have an account through MLB.com, to kind of be more personalized into what you like and what kind of players you like or what teams you can. Cause I think that's going to come pretty soon here. So yeah, MLB.com. You check out my stuff, Angels.com, and on Twitter, pretty active at Rhett Bollinger, and feel free to tweet at me and ask questions. Don't bother me too much. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it's like you guys probably get a lot of those questions of what are they doing and why can't this trade happen? I'm sure you get that. Both of you guys get that a ton. Thank you guys again. It was great to see a Trojan and a Sun Devil get along for at least an hour. I don't know. I'm sure Red probably came into the press box with his chest out a little bit more after the what was it, Monday night or Tuesday night win?
Yeah, oh yeah, I definitely did. I've worn a couple of USC shirts and the collared shirts from the press box this spring. A couple of big wins, and we'll see what they do against the Pac-12 team in Oregon this weekend.
Awesome, guys. Thank you very much. I know you guys are heading back to obviously Anaheim soon, so safe travels, and we're really looking forward to looking up reading both your guys' work as the season goes on with the 2021 season.
Thanks for having me.
Cool.